the huddle in the corner here, because we're going to now give you a chance to ask questions of our presenters. So get your thinking caps on. We've got 25 minutes for this to happen. And so what I'd invite you to do is to ask a question that is a question, not a thesis. So ask questions of our presenters, please. And Sandra, are you ready? Christian, maybe if you can come and sit on this side so I can hide in the corner, because they want to talk to you, not me. So who is going to be first cab off the rank? Come on, I know that you're not shy. Question right down the front. And just indicate which of the two presenters, or whether it's both presenters, you wish to ask your question or direct your question to.
Thank you for your presentations, both of you. My name is Marie-Thérèse Glaes and I'm from the LSM in Belgium. One of the words that came back in both your presentations, because this is to both of you, is meaning. So the meaningfulness of things and the meaning of work and at work and the core of meaning and all these things. And of course this is something that we have been working on, giving our students meaningful lectures, meaningful projects, a lot about meaning. And I'm a little bit surprised that this Maslow theory is still coming back. I mean, I thought we had passed that area where we have to go through these different stages, because as we know, we can mix these things, etc. And there is, as I learned many years ago in Asia, there is something missing at the top of Maslow. It is what you would call meaning, and they call spiritual value. And this is things that comes back in both of your presentations. It's giving meaning. And then on the other hand, we say that if you want your employees to behave in a certain way, you have to behave that way. The leader has to behave that certain way. So I was wondering, if we want our students to have have a meaningful life, have meaningful work, and we want to teach them meaningful things, etc., where do we start? So my question to both of you is, where do you start? As a leader of students, where's the meaning for you?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a wonderful point. And I think we are also, I mean, you know, we are constantly, I agree, it's almost the Hegelian notion of that history repeats itself, and that we kind of, a lot of probably what we talked about is also rediscovering, right? Rediscovering the idea of kind of what is the purpose at the core of what we're doing. And I couldn't agree more. I think what I thought about, and I think there's a lot to learn, obviously, from people in the room as well, I think, and it would be really interesting to hear how people essentially kind of do it in their classrooms. I think one of the things that I found very interesting is when the first two sessions with students together are not focused on what you want to do afterwards, or why did you come here, or, you know, the questions where they have pre-formulated answers, which are kind of very, you know, driven by expectations of families and other bits, but really focus on kind of, you know, what makes you come alive, and what is something that you really want to discover here, and then relating that to whatever the content is. Because I feel there's a lot of times this disconnect between, there's beautiful content, maybe there's someone who's extremely passionate about their work, but then there's a student sitting there saying, hey, look, like, I get why you're excited about it, but I don't necessarily see that fitting into me. And I think that goes beyond the idea of fitting, you know, the content to the target group, but it's really kind of like appealing to their core of saying, you know, a lot of the things that we do should be about questioning and setting the stage for questioning. And I think, actually, I think one of the reasons why I came to the LS in the first place was that motto, you know, question the causes or understand the causes of things. And I think if we set, like at the beginning already, the classroom, not as a kind of classroom of here are the truths and we'll talk about the truths, but exactly what you also talked about, that it's practical philosophy in the sense that everything should be questioned. And I think, again, I don't think, you know, I haven't seen like a one-size-fits-it-all solution, but I feel this approach of essentially kind of getting people to from the beginning kind of not be shy about their kind of what makes them really come alive, and then relate it to the lectures. Similar to how organizations, for example, when you see how some of the organizations we worked with around purpose, how they essentially say, we have this big corporate purpose here, but it doesn't really relate to the day-to-day of the people. And I think the same with then the classroom experience, that we might have great content, but does the day-to-day represent that? Does the way we assess students really represent what we talk about? I think we still use a lot of times very, very kind of simple assessment things like exams or simple essays, while what we should do is like have them work directly with companies on the ground, feel what it means. And I think that is the big shift also that we talked about with John in the lead up to this, that meaning is not about it's not about cognition, right? It's not about me saying to a student, hey, you have to discover your meaning. It's about a student going in a context and feeling, this is where I feel home, this is where I feel I can be myself, right? And I think like that only comes with working closely with not only kind of the traditional corporates, the traditional bits, but really kind of bringing on board, you know, this can be everything from social enterprises to, you know, these organizations people might not usually have worked with, to really say, how do we embed students better into environments where they can explore what they just learned? So kind of getting away from the complete primacy of cognition to the level of, you know, emotional intelligence and letting people feel it. That can be outside the classroom with projects, it can be inside the classroom with having really kind of that engagement with different mentors directly. So I think, but it feels to me that, and I would love to actually learn also from you, it seems like it's something you've really thought about, because I feel there's so many, it's probably 20 pages of what we could think about. But if I may just use this opportunity also to get back to Viktor Frankl, because what really resonated with me, so he wrote this book which was all about how he survived concentration camps during you know, the Holocaust, and he always wondered, why did Viktor survive psychologically? Physically there was no choice, but psychologically he did. And the way he framed it was to say, every day I try to find a small meaning in the day. Every day I tried to talk with one person and make them feel a little bit better about themselves, which then made me feel better. And I still wanted to write this book, so there was the bigger meaning. So this duality of a day-to-day meaning and then a bigger meaning, I feel if we can incorporate that in the classroom to say, hey, look, the bigger purpose of your education is that you have a meaningful career, but also we want to represent that in the day-to-day of how students go about their assignments, go about how we treat them as administrators and others, which I think is a whole other issue as well. And so I think like having really kind of organizations as a holistic force pushing for that meaning rather than the individual educator, I feel is probably at the core. Long answer to a very short question, but so.
Whoa, okay. I have to agree with you that you know, there are many levels to this. And I think I've highlighted one in my presentation at the very beginning that I was trying to set the scene, which was what is the meaning of work currently, because I think that is fundamentally changing what is the meaning of work, and whether we find or don't find meaning at work. And yes, I think, you know, you've covered quite well on how an individual finds meaning, and we try to do that in the universities. We try to do it with projects to encourage students to think about it. But I think it's also a larger question about how these students will become leaders in their own right. How do we as societies think about these issues? And I think we've come a long way, but we haven't figured them out. Yes, we've been at them a long time. 2-3 weeks ago in Australia, the CEOs of our largest companies, including Qantas, put forward a letter that spoke as to what they thought was issues in society that needed to be addressed, among them same-sex marriage and so on. And the government came out and said, well, businesses should stick to their knitting. And we said, well, hang on, if it's issues like poverty and so on, businesses are asked to speak up, but if it's these other issues, then businesses should not speak about that. So that again led us to have a conversation with our students and with our researchers, thinking, well, what is business for? And I think what is business for is not a settled question. A lot of the new models that we have now fundamentally change what a business is. And yes, we teach our students about the future of work. Everyone asks, what is the future of work? And we're enthralled with that question. But the same, just as good a question is, what is the future of unemployment? Because our students will live in a world where for many people this is a future of unemployment. So then where do you find meaning, or how do we as a society think about that? And our corporate partners are thinking about that. We have insurance companies that know that they will lay off in the next 2 years, they will lay off 5,000 people. They know they will not employ them in the organization, nor will they find employment in a similar organization. So they're thinking about what do we do with them as an organization by finding them other roles in society. So meaning of work, I think is a crucially important thing. Secondly, I think, and this is, I'm going back to, I'm trying to remember the name, but I can't because I'm jet lagged. There was a wonderful article in the New York Times a couple of days ago that was talking about the stories that we tell ourselves about Western civilization. And it was saying that for many years, the stories that we told ourselves after the war and so on were stories of success, were stories of the triumph of values, of human rights, of reason against all odds. And this was the story of Western civilization. Now a lot of the stories that we tell, the article was talking about a lot of the stories that we tell about Western civilizations are stories of failure, are stories where we weren't good enough. We tell stories from the past, whether they're related to slavery or women's rights and so on, where we failed as a Western society, failures of democracy and so on. We do that around meaning of work as well. We look at companies like Uber and all the bad stories that are written about Uber, and there's so much shit written about it. It's got its own mass and gravity, and it's bringing in other organizations where there are failures of how we do this. It's important that we keep talking about that, I think. There.
Thank you both. Other questions? Milton.
All right. So thank you very much for your presentations. Really enjoyed it. First of all, thank you also for bringing up this whole aspect of meaning and taking on that note before. I've been fighting to incorporate that into curriculum already for more than 10 years with varying degrees of success. And also, I must say, not every Generation Y is that interested in talking about meaning. But my question, without trying to, as John was trying to warn us not to come into a thesis type of discussion, but I see a huge mismatch between what we're trying to do here and the message of changing dramatically how we go about educating our students. But unfortunately, the Financial Times is not yet called the Meaningful Times, and I don't see any meaningfulness in the criteria set by the Financial Times. And the fact is that every single school here still measures itself by aspects like career progression, salary raise, and how do you look at this apparent such a gap between what we are trying to do here and how we assess ourselves and how we compare each other in terms of how good we are and how much of an impact we're having. That's a struggle that I still don't know how to deal with, and I would like to hear your opinion, maybe others in the room.
Yeah, I agree. There's probably others in the room who are more qualified to look at it from a long-term perspective in terms of what it actually means in terms of career progression. Maybe I'll be happy to share an anecdote on it in how I experienced it myself, in the sense that, and this is off the record probably, right? Or is it? I mean, it's not taped, right? Or is it? Oh, okay, that's good to know. No, but I think so. I remember, so when I came to LSE 9 years ago, I came as a kind of, entrepreneurial more practitioner thinking person, but with a very deep inclination of, I want to, write like rigorous papers, and I want to, really embed that into something. And I think what was really interesting was that I came with this idea of like doing it both at once, and then I think some of the early academic people I would work with definitely made very clear, choose either like a hardcore kind of academic career or choose a career where you focus on really good teaching and really good kind of like projects, and so the either or decision in a way. And I've seen that with a lot of colleagues of mine, both at the LSE but also in general, that like you either come as a kind of PhD who says, hey, I really want to be kind of academically great, and then you go that route, and then, you teach a bit, but that's it, which is perfect, kind of, I think, especially for the publication track. And then kind of the other side, which is more, hey, I want to try to combine both. And unfortunately, for the latter, most people I've seen indeed have not really succeeded then publishing very well. And I think it's actually also a struggle. So when I think about the last 9 years of trying to approach this and being very early on in a way on the academic side in terms of publications, I do have to say that the question of how to integrate it, to me in a way, what resonated most was there's this Paul Graham, I don't know if anyone ever came across, so he's this, he built a couple of Y Combinator, for example, which is this startup incubator. And he had this whole notion of maker schedule versus manager schedule. And his whole idea was that essentially when you are doing conceptual work, when you're doing publishing, when you're doing everything that is strategic or requires deep thought, it is a completely different approach to when you're on a manager schedule, managing projects, going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I think the deep mistake I made at the very early on was to say, I want to mix that and I want to kind of like be great in all fields and I want to do it all at once and I want to bum, bum, bum. And I think over time then the realization was to say, hey, look, you need to separate this in terms of maybe only in the mornings, that's the maker schedule, where in the mornings it's all about publishing and it's all about rigorous, like really diving deep, just being surrounded by hardcore academics and like really going deep into like the methodological bits, and then like having 3 or 4 hours dedicated that are then the kind of teaching bits, impact bits and so on so, but in a way separated in mindset, but not separated in content, if that makes sense. And I think that journey I feel I've seen with other colleagues as well who try to do both, to say in a way if there's a way to separate our mindsets, to really focus on the one doing it really well and then the other one kind of building on this, so not mixing it all up, but at the same time then trying to combine that content. And I think nobody I know of has really figured it out completely, I think, and I include myself there, I think in terms of really putting a lot of energy on trying to figure exactly that kind of question out. I've seen at the LSE over the last years one interesting development, which is that because the more practitioner-oriented kind of teaching and projects attract funding from the outside, that then goes into potential research funding, it has made it more attractive to also look a bit more into kind of like the question of how do we, do these projects better and how can that relate better. And so some of the new research fellowships, for example, also have this component in them to say, how do you really kind of, focus on the funding component, which then comes with these projects. But long story short, I do feel that the people I've observed around me who really try to bring it together, try to do it in a way where they separate it, where they really say, these are my focused hours, and maybe these are the hours then where others have a bit more free time, and that's where they work a bit more. And I do think it's almost like the same question, like, when you look at working parents, like, it's like this thing where you want to be good at both, but like, to be really good at both, it is probably also a lot of sacrifice in one, and I think I feel it's a huge journey, and I would love to hear, especially from those in the audience who, kind of went through that process for a longer time, how that plays out. And I think there's a lot actually we can learn probably from also the audience, particularly. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that. I'll try to go back to the question a little bit, because the way I read your question, and I'm going to try to answer the way I read it, was around the sort of this need to make a profit that around the Financial Times is not the Meaning Times, and about this responsibility that we have. And I don't know whether you asked that question as business schools or as companies that we prepare.
No, I can just clarify that there's an element to what she was just saying. That is something about our obsession with rankings. And the rankings have nothing about meaning. Absolutely nothing. So if we go in this direction, measuring ourselves, assessing ourselves according to the Financial Times rankings, it's quite a disparity between how we assess ourselves and what we're trying to do. How do we go about that? Should we call the Financial Times and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong? What should we do?
Now you're giving it back to me. Yep, so two answers that I'd have to that question. First one, I'd say, if we don't like it, these rankings and everything else is made by people just like us. So if we really want these things to change, then we need to do something about it. So things like what Christian's saying about what LSE is doing and what many of our other schools are doing. So we're looking at engagement and we're measuring engagement for ourselves. And there's a huge push for that, both within our university and within the larger university complex. in a minute. And so I think that is quite important. Second, I think because of what's happening outside, there will be an accelerated pace at which this happens. Because one of the implicit assumptions in the story that I told was that many of the jobs that we're preparing our students for will disappear. Then do we need to rethink what universities are for? Because if profit and rankings are our interest, then I don't care that I prepare, I don't know, 2,000 Master of Professional Accounting students that will not have a job in 5 years. Those are questions that we need to ask ourselves as business schools. So I think that will force us to rethink what we do.
Milton's question really touches on the ambiguity that we all face as academic workers in one sense, I suppose, and also the way that we make sense or attribute meaning to our labour, and also the way we navigate through the ambiguities of the meaning making within the structures that we inhabit. I think that's what a ranking system is. It's a sense of meaning making, but a very narrow one. Unfortunately, we are at time. Can I invite you to thank our two key presenters for sharing with us their insights and suggestions around how we navigate our way through this VUCA world that we and our students inhabit now. So please join with me in thanking them. Now what I'd like to do is to invite Leuven Calaver to come up and explain to you what happens next around the World Cafe. You have to pay very close attention here, and there is a test afterwards, and it has to do with you being an active contributor to meaning making right now.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon to all of you. I hope you're still awake. It's been an intensive 2 hours. And we've been building this program very consciously, having a very good input for all of us as a group and a community. And there's two, I think, main lines that you can draw or conclusions out of the conversations and the presentations of Christian and Sandra. That's one, the future is not there for institutions. The futures will be there for networks, and we need agility. And when you look into your profession, we have the party going on, being together today, tomorrow, and also on Friday, of being in a networked community of CEMS, of all these business schools together. And Sandra, you didn't mention it, but the most, you may check your mail, but the most important thing you were saying is